Hello everyone, I'm Bo to the Wild, and welcome back to episode 2 of Custom Robo. Today is a sort of training day. Nothing much happens. We go to the training gym, we face some robots in the training gym, and we do one job for Steel Hearts. And that is the entirety of what today is. We're still in the phase of teaching the player the mechanics and whatnot of Custom Robo. So a lot of these beginning days are going to be very slow, just because nothing much happens. Here's the training sim I was talking about earlier, if you want to try any parts out. As you can see, I do not like the three-way gun. Long range and medium range on the three-way gun really isn't that great. If you get in real close with the three-way gun, it does a lot of damage just because all three lines will actually hit the opponent. But there are better guns that do that later on, so I'm not going to use it. Generally, every day starts off with us talking to Lucy and just explaining any stuff that is important to the day. I say that in a very loose sense. Most of the conversations with Lucy really aren't that important. And with a lot of these beginning days, we generally go to Steel Hearts first before we get our mission for the day. And as I already said earlier, we're going to the training gym to train. It's training day. The movie. Or the series. I think there was a series. I'll be corrected on that later on. Here's our first mention of Marcia. I've already mentioned her earlier in episode 1. She's on duty right now because, unlike us two, she's not a slacker. Of course, there's only 3 people working at Steel Hearts. The main character, Harry, and Marcia. And it's not like Steel Hearts gets a lot of jobs. Like, they're going to get a lot of jobs in the course of the game, but they don't. It sounds like they didn't get a lot of jobs beforehand. Yeah, Marcia and Harry were doing all the footwork. That's just because they were the only 2 members. We actually get our first difficult fight here against Harry. This is our first time fighting against Harry, and this is where the AI switches between brain dead to I'ma kick your ass. Harry's also one of the few commanders who can actually create a Holosseum. However, we don't actually get to see his Holosseum during this fight. He's also telling us how pods work. Wherever you point the direction of the control stick, that's where the pods will fire. So it is useful depending on how you want to fire your pods. Harry also uses a Shining Fighter. He uses the Glory model, and he uses the Gatling gun weapon. The Gatling gun fires 8 projectiles, and they're really great at stunning people, and if you get real close up with it, you can generally knock down an enemy robo unless they're a metal grappler. Or a more defensive model. Because we have a lack of really good weapons here, this fight is generally hard, because you either have the 3-way gun or the basic gun. Harry's not going to take it easy on you. It doesn't help that Harry has a lot better weaponry than you do. Yeah, and because the fact that you can damage yourself with your own pods and bombs, I got knocked down earlier because of that. One of my favorite strategies in this game is just to get right in front of the AI's face, but this does not work out really well for me, just because the Gatling gun is really great at stopping robos from doing that, because of how many projectiles it fires. You also have a lot of lag on the stuff you do. When you jump and land, you have lag. When you fire, you lag. Generally, you want to be behind something after you do a jump or a gunshot. You can also do a sliding shot when you move and fire. Basically, you are dedicated to a lot of things when you do them. So when you jump, you are dedicated to that jump, and when you land, you will face ending lag. So you want to play a bit smart. Of course, I play super recklessly, and that's just because later on, there's a lot of weapons that allow me to play super recklessly. We get the standard Bomb S, which is a part of the standard sub-series. Its blast effect does something different when you hit an opponent with it. Again, it's something you really need to go into the parts description and learn what it does. Because there are a lot of sub-parts to weapons. And now we have to face the 4 robot enemies. Standard Bomb S, when you hit an opponent with it, it stuns them for a couple of seconds. And it is actually one of the better bombs that you get. Just because when you hit the opponent, they are generally stuck in lag, so you can hit them. A lot of these robots, I've already talked about what I just mentioned, which is you are dedicated to whatever you're doing, so you want to be behind something when you finish it because of the ending lag. We get our first Little Raider model. This Little Raider is the Peregrine. The Little Raider series is based around being really fast, but if they touch anything that damages them, they get immediately knocked down. Now that can see as a blessing and be a blessing and a curse. When you get knocked down, you don't take as much damage when you're downed. However, because if you touch anything that damages you, you get immediately knocked down. So in a weird way, they take less damage from attacks because they get immediately knocked down. So it's a weird... Yeah, you get knocked down a lot easier, but you take less damage when you get knocked down. They also don't have an air dash, they have a continuous jump. Every Little Raider has the continuous jump. Not every Robo has an air dash, as you can see with the Little Raider. And of course, some Robos have only 1 dash, or even 3 dashes. You just saw right there that the opponent's projectiles from their gun disappeared. When you knock down a Robo while they're firing their weapon and their projectile exists with your own weapon, meaning the gun that you have, their projectile ceases to exist. So if you can actually tank damage and come out and actually knock them down, say you got hit by 3 shots of the Gatling gun, but you fired your gun and you knocked down your opponent, the 5 other shots that are planning to hit you will disappear. Here we get the Speed Pod D, part of the Speed Pod series. It's not a great pod, not gonna lie. There's a lot of pods and bombs that aren't that great. Like, some of the pods just really don't do anything well. Like, the Caboose series I really don't care for because you have to be going in the opposite direction to fire them. The Caboose series fires behind you, so you have to be dashing away from your opponent to fire your pod. It's the reason why I don't use them. Granted, they do a lot of damage, but it's so awkward to use them. Here's another Little Raider. The same model, to be exact. He has the Dolphin Pod, which goes towards your opponent in a strange arc. They're not a bad pod, but they're not my favorite pod. And of course we have some new Holosseums. These Holosseums that look like the basic Holosseum really don't do much of anything. As you can see, yeah, the Speed Pod goes real fast, but it's so erratic that you're more likely to hit yourself with the pod. Most of the pods I generally use tend to have a focus on homing capabilities. There's one pod that you get very late into a new journey, that's the Chaser Pod. That is generally what I stick with, just because its whole entire deal is that it just chases after the enemy. In fact, one of the best parts in the game is a modified chaser with more pods that you can deploy. There are other pods that have homing capabilities, but they generally have a gimmick. One of the other pods I tend to use in the midpoint of the game is the spider pod. It allows you to place 3 pods that are proximity based, and when an enemy gets close, they start chasing after it, but the pathfinding on the spider pods can be a bit jank sometimes. That's a lot with the strange homing pods. Unlike Chaser, they have weird pathfinding. So you kind of have to coerce your opponent into running into the pod. Granted, you usually use pods and bombs as a distraction so you can get in with your main gun and do damage. We finally get a new body, which is the Criminal, which is a Trick Flyer robo. Trick Flyers don't have a standard dash. They have multiple jumps, much like the Little Raiders, but since it's better than the Ray 01, I am going to be switching over to it. Another thing that you can do with the custom robo bodies is actually change the color, and my favorite color palette for the Criminal is the blue, which is more of a white with blue highlights. So I have a very nice, clean look for the Criminal. Which is funny, because if I'm right, the next robo we go up against is a Trick Flyer. Just so we can get used to how Trick Flyers work. Sometimes the game likes to explain a robo model as soon as you get one or meet one, but that's not all the time. Like, we will have an explanation on Metal Grapplers, but we won't get that explanation on this day. Our opponent is using another Trick Flyer model, the Buggy, which is, I would say, probably one of the worst designed robos ever. It is just an atrocious design. And we're now going into the high-rise Plaza Coliseum, which again is just a variation of the standard Coliseum. There's no gimmicks to this Coliseum, it's just very straight-laced. Sometimes when you do land, when you have the 1 on your cube, it will tick down to 6, and that is very bad. So if you do try to do what I did, which was land near the opponent because you're on 1, sometimes you'll tick over to 6 and you'll get out last. As you can see with my dashes, they're more a continuous jump. They're short dashes. There is a leg part that you can get that makes your dashes short dashes, but it's really not that great. So if you're going to go for short dashes, just go with the Trick Flyer models. I will generally use the Trick Flyer model that we get until around mid to almost halfway through the game, because there is one series of robos that I really like to use. The dash of the Criminal is also a very weird dash. You saw me do it at the beginning of this fight, where it turns into like a weird top and dashes at its opponent. The one thing you need to know about dash is that you are invincible for a set period of time when you do a dash. You can completely ignore bullets. You can't ignore pods or bombs, though. And as you saw from a standard Bomb S, he stood in place for like a little bit. That's the lag that the standard Bomb S generates when it hits an enemy. But even though he's using a Trick Flyer, this fight is still the same. Most of these fights, you'll see me get close to being defeated, and that's just because I'm using the basic blaster. It's not that great. We get our first Gemini bomb, which is our first multi-bomb, where instead of 1 bomb coming out, it's 2 bombs. Get it? Because it's Gemini. You know, astrology. Gemini bombs really aren't that great because when you do them on the ground, they fire left to right, but when you fire them in the air, they do up and down. It's great at confusing both your opponent and you, but mostly you, because if you're playing this single player, you're just fighting against the AI. It's a lot better when you get the Delta Bomb, which we won't get in A New Journey, because the Delta Bomb is part of the Grand Battle. We're facing another Trick Flyer, the Buggy again. Again, these fights really aren't that interesting. And again, even with this new map, Well, technically it's not a moving map, we've already seen it, but even then, it's just a variation of the standard Coliseum. The basic gun really isn't that great, and you'll see me struggle with some of these fights just because I do not like using the basic gun, and you don't really get a respectable gun until a few days later. And again, I don't like using the freeway. Granted, if you get in an opponent's face, the basic weapon can be really good. I will say the sound effects in this game can be a bit crazy. Some projectiles will just blow out the noise for no reason. The final boss has a weapon that if he fires it dead square in front of you, it blows out the noise and it just causes ear damage for like no reason. That's another thing. A lot of the Robos have animations. They have like 2 to 3 animations when they do a victory animation. And of course we get Cockroach. Cockroach is one of the first homing pods, but it's not that great, so you won't see much of it. And after our training day, we actually get a mission, but because Harry is Harry, he doesn't have his cell phone on. And he's talking to the receptionist, because he's Harry. I just like how harsh language is used as symbols, so we don't even know what Ernest said. But now we have to go to Hub Park, because there are apparently people fighting with Robos there. Basically, a girl hit up both of them for a date, and well, they're both there, so they were like, huh, I was on this date with her. No, I was on this date with her, and now they're in a tussle that we're gonna have to sort out. We will see these characters later on, but they don't serve a plot purpose besides just being our first real gig. This does mark the first point in the game where you can pick your fight, as you are given a choice of who of the two guys you want to fight. Both fights generally play out the same though, so you're not really missing much if you don't choose the other guy, and I'm not going to show the other fight just because it's not really much of a difference. And of course, since we're here with Harry, he's going to act as our tutorial guy again. Again, that's throughout almost the entire game when we get that, and it sucks. Much like a few of our opponents that we fought before, he's using a trick flyer with the criminal. We get another appearance of the Gatling weapon, and we get a new Coliseum, the Flower Garden. Which means this guy's map is the Flower Garden. This guy can create this Coliseum. Again, because I'm still using the basic weapon, I have to be a lot more careful against the Gatling. Trust me, when we get a weapon later on, I won't have to worry as much. It's just that, again, your weapon choice for your main weapon is kind of bad at this point in the game. Granted, your choice in bombs and pods are pretty good, because flank is really good just for stopping the opponent's movements, and if you do hit with standard bomb S, it stuns them for like a good 5 seconds, allowing you to do whatever you want. And much like all the rest of the fights in the second day, it's not much of anything. Again, the only hard fight that you had today was against Harry, just because the AI wanted to give you a hard time. We get another pod, and we actually get our first leg parts. Leg parts generally change how your dash works. And the biggest problem with the leg parts is that there are generally only 2 really good leg parts, just because they don't really modify your dash all that much. And we finally get our first appearance of the 3rd member of our trio, which is Marcia. And remember I was saying earlier that we don't have a license? Yeah, you can be arrested in this universe if you don't have a license and you're a bounty hunter. Like how Harry finally remembers that. He's like, oh yeah, you can be arrested. And it's like, shouldn't you brought that up beforehand? And then you realize, oh wait a second, it's Harry. He's not the brightest bulb in the box. And basically, we're gonna guilt Ernest into paying our license test, because there is a fee to take the test. Mainly because Ernest doesn't want to deal with the cops, because no one really likes the cops. I think I said earlier that the lowest rank was Class C, it's actually Class D. I will correct myself. Also, you'll notice that wanted picture back in the background for Marv. Marv is a character in the Robo series, in the Custom Robo series. It's just that he does not play an important part in this game. He's basically a cameo in this game. I think he has an important part in the 1st and 2nd games, but don't quote me on that because I do not know much about those games. The only game I really know anything about is this one and some of the DS game. And when I mean some, I mean I know it exists and I know it was released over here. We notice that Marcia's defining character trait at this point is that she's very closed off. We don't have an explanation for that right now. And of course, since it's the end of the day, we get the option of, hey, do you want to go directly home and start the next day, or do you want to linger around? I'm going to linger around so I can get the parts that were given to me. Yeah, Cockroach is a very strange pod as it moves slow unless it sees its target, and then it will start going faster towards its target. It's not a bad chaser pod, but there are other chaser pods that are a lot better. And of course, we gotta talk to Lucy at the end of the day before we actually start the next day. And she thinks we're gonna be doing a lie detector test. It's a license test, Lucy. Get your ears checked. But on that note, this has been episode 2 of Custom Robo, and I will see you in episode 3.